On a cold autumn night in 1888, a young man received a letter that had been buried for 50 years. The strange part was this: the sender had died long before the letter was ever written. And what happened after he opened it became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Tonight, close your eyes and travel back to the old United States, to dusty roads, gaslit streets, and forgotten secrets hidden beneath the soil of a small town called Black Hollow. This is the story of the letter from the dead. The year was 1888. In the remote hills of Pennsylvania stood a tiny town called Black Hollow. It was a place most maps ignored. Fewer than 300 people lived there. They knew one another's names, habits, and even their secrets. Nothing unusual ever happened in Black Hollow, until the letter arrived. The town's postmaster, an old man named Samuel Reed, had worked in the small wooden post office for nearly 40 years. Every morning he opened the doors at exactly 7 o'clock. On October 14th he found something strange. Among the usual newspapers and bills lay a single envelope. It was yellow with age. The paper looked ancient, almost brittle. There was no stamp, no return address. Only one name was written on the front: Mr. Thomas Whitaker. Samuel frowned. Thomas Whitaker had only arrived in town 2 days earlier. The young man was 28 years old and had come from Boston after inheriting his grandfather's abandoned farmhouse outside Black Hollow. No one knew him. No one expected mail for him. Samuel picked up the envelope. A cold feeling passed through his hands. The handwriting looked oddly familiar. He stared at it for several seconds. Then his face turned pale, because he had seen that handwriting before. Many years ago, on the gravestone of a man buried in the town cemetery. A man named Edward Whitaker, Thomas's grandfather. And Edward Whitaker had died in 1838, exactly 50 years earlier. The morning fog still covered the streets when Samuel walked toward the old farmhouse. Thomas was outside repairing a broken fence. "You have a letter?" Samuel said. Thomas smiled. "A letter? Nobody even knows I'm here." Samuel handed him the envelope. The moment Thomas touched it, the smile disappeared. He looked confused. "Who sent this?" Samuel shook his head. "I think your grandfather did." Thomas laughed. "That's impossible." "I know." The two men stood in silence. A cold wind moved through the trees. Finally, Thomas opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. The message contained only 12 words. "Do not enter the cellar until the moon turns red again." No signature. No date. Nothing else. Thomas read it twice. Then 3 times. "What kind of joke is this?" he asked. But Samuel wasn't listening. He was staring toward the farmhouse. Specifically, toward the small window near the cellar. For a brief second he thought he saw someone standing there, watching them. A dark figure. Then it vanished. That evening, Thomas asked several townspeople about his grandfather. Most refused to talk. Some looked frightened. Others simply walked away. Only one person agreed to speak. An elderly woman named Martha Green. She lived alone near the edge of town. Her house smelled of old books and burning wood. When Thomas mentioned Edward Whitaker's name, she nearly dropped her teacup. "You should leave this place," she whispered. "Why?" "Because your grandfather brought darkness here." Thomas frowned. "My grandfather was a farmer." Martha slowly shook her head. "No. He was a man searching for something." "What?" She looked toward the window, as if afraid someone might hear. Then she whispered, "He was searching for a door." "A door?" "A door that should never be opened." Thomas laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous." But Martha did not smile. "He found it beneath that farmhouse." The room became silent. Thomas felt a chill. Beneath the farmhouse? In the cellar. His heart skipped. He remembered the letter. "Do not enter the cellar." "What's in the cellar?" he asked. Martha's hands began to shake. "I don't know." "But my grandfather did?" She nodded. "And whatever he found, changed him forever. That night, rain began falling over Black Hollow. Thomas sat alone in the farmhouse. The letter lay on the table. The cellar door stood only a few feet away. Wooden. Locked with a rusted chain. He couldn't stop looking at it. Every few minutes he read the message again. Do not enter the cellar until the moon turns red again. What did it mean? Why would a dead man send such a warning? And why had everyone in town become frightened? A loud knock suddenly echoed through the house. Thomas opened the front door. Nobody was there. Only the rain. Then he looked down. A muddy footprint. One. Then another. Leading toward the back of the house. Toward the cellar. He followed them with a lantern. The footprints stopped directly in front of the chain door. And there. Something had been written in the dust. 3 words. He is waiting. Thomas's hands began to tremble. A strange sound suddenly came from below. Slow. Deliberate. Knock. From inside the cellar. Knock. 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 Thomas froze. Because the cellar had been locked for 50 years. And yet, something was knocking from the other side. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the farmhouse. Thomas stood in front of the cellar door, lantern shaking in his hand. Then, another sound. A whisper. Very soft. Almost impossible to hear. Thomas? He jumped backward. The voice had come from below. Again. Thomas? It sounded old, weak, and strangely familiar. He didn't know why, but every hair on his body stood up. Suddenly the lantern went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Thomas stumbled backward and ran upstairs. He locked his bedroom door and did not sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning the rain had ended. Sunlight filled the valley as if nothing had happened. But Thomas looked terrible. His eyes were red and his hands still trembled. He decided to visit the town cemetery. If his grandfather truly had something to do with this mystery, perhaps his grave held the answers. The cemetery sat on a lonely hill outside Black Hollow. Most of the gravestones were broken and covered in moss. At the very end stood a large stone. Edward Whittaker, 1806 to 1838. Beloved husband and father. Thomas stared at it. His grandfather had died more than 50 years ago. Yet somehow, a letter from him had appeared yesterday. Then Thomas noticed something strange. The ground in front of the grave looked disturbed, as if someone had recently been digging there. He knelt and touched the soil. It was fresh. Someone had been here. Very recently. Then he heard a voice behind him. You should not stay here after sunset. Thomas turned. An old groundskeeper stood beside him. He carried a shovel and wore a black coat. His name was Elias Moore. He had taken care of the cemetery for decades. Did someone dig here? Thomas asked. The old man nodded slowly. 3 nights ago. Who? I don't know. You didn't see them? No. Then how do you know? Elias looked at the grave. Because I heard them. Thomas frowned. Heard what? Digging. The old man swallowed. But when I came to investigate, there was nobody here. A cold wind crossed the cemetery. Thomas suddenly felt uneasy. Then Elias spoke again. Your grandfather's grave has never been quiet. What do you mean? The old man looked directly into his eyes. Sometimes, I hear knocking. Thomas's blood ran cold. Knocking. The same sound he had heard from the cellar. That evening Thomas returned to the farmhouse. He couldn't stop thinking about the grave, or the whisper, or the strange message. He tried reading a book to calm himself. But every few minutes his eyes wandered toward the cellar door. Finally he made a decision. He would open it. Warnings or not, he needed answers. He found an old hammer and walked downstairs. The chain looked ancient. One strong hit broke the lock. The cellar door slowly creaked open. A terrible smell came from below. Damp earth, mold, and something else. Something rotten. Thomas raised his lantern. Stone steps disappeared into darkness. For several seconds he hesitated. Then he began to descend. 1 step. 2 steps. 3. The air grew colder. At the bottom he found a small underground room. Dust covered everything. Old shelves. Broken furniture. Wooden boxes. Nothing unusual. Then he saw it. A chair. Standing alone in the center of the room. And on the chair, another envelope. His name was written on it. Thomas Whitaker. He froze. Someone had placed it there. Recently. There was no dust on the envelope. With shaking hands he opened it. Inside was another message. You opened the door too early. Below it was a second sentence. Now he knows you are here. Suddenly something moved in the darkness. A soft scraping sound. Thomas raised the lantern. Nothing. Then, another sound. Behind him. He turned. The cellar door upstairs slammed shut. The lantern flickered. The room became colder. Then he heard footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from somewhere deeper underground. But there was no other door. No other room. No other passage. And yet, the footsteps were getting closer. Step. 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 Thomas backed away. Then his lantern illuminated something on the wall. A symbol. A circle. Inside it was the drawing of a red moon. And beneath it, carved into the stone, were 6 words. The gate opens when the moon bleeds. The footsteps suddenly stopped. Silence. Then a voice spoke from the darkness. A deep, broken voice. Edward. Thomas could barely breathe. Again. Edward, you came back. The lantern went out. Everything became black. Then something touched his shoulder. A cold hand. Not living. Not human. Thomas screamed. When he opened his eyes, he was lying outside the farmhouse. Morning sunlight covered the fields. He had no memory of how he escaped. The cellar door was closed. The chain had been repaired. As if it had never been broken. Thomas slowly stood up. Then he noticed something in his hand. A small brass key. Attached to it was a piece of paper. Only 3 words were written. Find the red church. Thomas stared at the brass key. It was old and heavy, covered with strange symbols. He turned it over in his hand. On one side was the same mark he had seen in the cellar. A circle surrounding a red moon. And now there was another mystery. Find the red church. But there was only one church in Black Hollow. And it wasn't red. That morning, Thomas went to see Martha Green. The old woman opened the door and immediately noticed the key. The color drained from her face. Where did you get that? She whispered. In the cellar. She stepped backward. No. Martha, what is this key? Her hands trembled. You opened the cellar. Thomas didn't answer. She already knew. You should have listened to the letter. I need answers. The old woman looked at him for a long time. Then she finally spoke. There used to be another church. Another one? She nodded. It burned down 70 years ago. Where? In the forest beyond the river. And it was red? The bricks were dark red. People called it the Red Church. Thomas's heart began to beat faster. What happened there? Martha lowered her voice. A terrible night. She led him into her attic. Dust covered everything. Old books. Broken chairs. Wooden trunks. Finally she pulled out a faded newspaper. The date read, June 3, 1817. The headline said, Mysterious Fire Destroys Local Church. Thomas read silently. According to the article, 32 people had gathered in the church that night. None of them survived. The cause of the fire had never been discovered. But one sentence caught his attention. Witnesses reported hearing screams long after the building had collapsed. He looked up. What does this have to do with my grandfather? Martha's eyes filled with fear. Edward was there. Thomas frowned. My grandfather would have been 11 years old. Yes. He survived. She nodded slowly. He was the only one. Silence filled the attic. The only survivor? Thomas whispered. Martha looked toward the window. After that night, he was never the same. As the sun began to set, Thomas left the house. He followed an old trail through the woods. The deeper he went, the darker the forest became. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Then he saw it. The ruins of the red church. The stone wall still stood. Broken windows stared like empty eyes. Weeds covered the entrance. And yet, someone had been here recently. Fresh footprints covered the ground. Thomas stepped inside. The air felt strangely cold. At the center of the ruined church stood an old stone altar. And on the altar was a candle, still burning. He froze. Someone was here. Then a voice came from the shadows. "You came sooner than I expected." Thomas turned. An old man stepped forward. He wore a long black coat and carried a lantern. Thomas had never seen him before. "Who are you?" he asked. The man smiled. "My name is Gabriel Cross. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." Thomas looked around. "Do you know anything about this place?" Gabriel's smile disappeared. "Far too much." He walked toward the altar. "Your grandfather used to stand exactly where you are standing now." Thomas's heart skipped. "You knew him?" "Very well." "Then tell me what's happening." The old man stared at the ruined ceiling. Then he spoke. "Your grandfather made a terrible mistake." "What mistake?" "He opened a door." Thomas felt cold. Again. A door. The same thing Martha had mentioned. "What door?" Gabriel looked directly into his eyes. "The door beneath this church." Silence. "There is another cellar here?" Thomas asked. The old man nodded. "And something lives behind that door." The wind suddenly blew through the ruins. The candle went out. Darkness filled the church. Then, a sound. Knock. 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 Thomas nearly dropped his lantern. The sound came from beneath the floor. The exact same knocking. Gabriel closed his eyes. "It has awakened." "What has?" The old man looked terrified. "He knows your name now." Thomas could barely breathe. "Who?" Gabriel whispered one word. "The keeper." At that exact moment, something hit the church door. Bang. Then again. Bang. Bang. The entire building shook. Thomas stared toward the entrance. Nobody was there. Yet something was trying to get inside. Again. Bang. Dust fell from the ceiling. Gabriel grabbed Thomas's arm. "We have to leave." "What is that?" "It found you." Another violent crash. The old wooden doors burst open. Cold air rushed inside. And then, footsteps. Heavy. Slow. Coming from outside. But nobody could be seen. Invisible footsteps. Step. 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 Closer. 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 Gabriel's face turned white. "No." "What is it?" The old man whispered. "He has never left the church before." The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a deep voice echoed through the darkness. A voice that seemed to come from everywhere. "The blood of Edward has returned." Thomas couldn't move. Again the voice spoke. "The gate must open." Then the footsteps began once more, coming directly toward them. The invisible footsteps stopped only a few feet away. Thomas couldn't breathe. The ruined church had become silent. Even the wind had disappeared. Then, a shape slowly appeared in the darkness. At first it looked like smoke. Then it became a shadow. And finally, a man. He was extremely tall and wore a long black coat that seemed older than the church itself. His face was pale. His eyes were completely black. And around his neck hung a silver key. The same symbol of the red moon was carved into it. Gabriel took a step backward. The keeper. The figure slowly raised his head. His eyes settled on Thomas. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the stranger spoke. "You look like him." Thomas swallowed. "Like who?" The man's expression changed. "Edward." A chill ran through Thomas's body. "Who are you?" he asked. The figure remained silent. Then he answered, "I have had many names." He took another step forward. But for 200 years, they have called me the keeper. The old church groaned as the wind returned. Thomas tried to gather his courage. What do you want from me? The keeper looked at him strangely. I want nothing. Then why are you following me? Because you opened the cellar. I didn't know. I know. The keeper interrupted him. His voice sounded tired, almost sad. You made the same mistake your grandfather made. Thomas looked at Gabriel. The old man said nothing. Finally, Thomas asked the question that had haunted him from the beginning. What is the gate? The keeper closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was fear in them. Real fear. A prison. Silence. A prison for what? The keeper didn't answer immediately. Then he whispered, for something older than this town. A sudden rumble echoed beneath the church floor. The stones trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The keeper looked downward. It is waking. Gabriel's face turned pale. We don't have much time. Thomas stared at them. What are you talking about? The keeper slowly approached the altar. Then he placed his hand upon the stone. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was an old leather journal. The cover carried a familiar name. Edward Whittaker. Thomas's heart nearly stopped. My grandfather's journal? The keeper handed it to him. Read the first page. Thomas opened it. The handwriting matched the letters. His grandfather's handwriting. The first page contained only one sentence. If you are reading this, I have failed. Thomas turned the page and began to read. October 3rd, 1838. I found the door beneath the church. I was a fool. The keeper warned me not to open it, but I believed treasure was hidden below. I was wrong. There is no treasure, only darkness. Thomas turned another page. I heard voices calling my name. I saw people who had died many years ago. I saw my wife. I saw my son. The thing behind the door knows our memories. It knows our fears. And now it knows me. Another page. If I die, my bloodline must never return to Black Hollow. Because the gate only opens for my family. Thomas stopped reading. The room suddenly felt cold. He looked at the keeper. What does this mean? The keeper answered quietly. Your grandfather sealed the prison. And the seal was made with his blood. Silence. Only someone from his family can break it. Thomas slowly understood. The letters, the warnings, the cellar, everything. The prison wanted him. A terrible sound suddenly echoed beneath the church. Crack. The floor split open. A red light rose from the darkness below. The entire building shook. Gabriel stumbled backward. No. It's too soon. The keeper drew a long knife from his coat. Its blade shone like silver. What are you doing? Thomas asked. The keeper looked directly at him. There is only one way to stop it. Another crack split the floor. The red light became brighter. Then, voices. Hundreds of voices. Crying. Screaming. Calling Thomas's name. Thomas? 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 He covered his ears. What is happening? The keeper's face hardened. The prison is opening. The ground shook again. Then a hand appeared. A black hand. Long and thin. Reaching up through the broken floor. Then another. And another. Gabriel screamed. They're coming out. The keeper grabbed Thomas's arm. Listen to me carefully. What are those things? They are not the prisoner. Thomas froze. What? The keeper's eyes filled with horror. They are only the servants. Silence. Then, what is the prisoner? The keeper looked into the red light, and for the first time, he seemed afraid. Very afraid. He whispered, I have guarded this place for 2 centuries, and I still do not know its name. Suddenly, something enormous moved beneath the church. The entire ground rose and fell, as if something gigantic had just taken a breath. Then a deep voice echoed from below, a voice older than any human being, a voice that seemed to come from the earth itself. Open the gate. The red light exploded across the room. The church walls began to collapse. And from the darkness below, something started climbing upward. The red light burst through the cracks in the floor. The entire church shook violently. Stones crashed from the ceiling. Thomas fell to his knees. Everything became silent. A deep, unnatural silence. Even the screaming voices had disappeared. And from the darkness below, something began to emerge. At first, Thomas thought it was smoke. Then he realized it was moving, twisting, breathing. A black mist rose from the pit and slowly formed the shape of a man. No, not a man. Something wearing the shape of one. It had long arms, pale skin, and eyes that glowed like burning coals. Its face kept changing. Every few seconds it became someone else. An old woman, a young boy, a soldier, a crying child. Thomas gasped. The creature's face became his own. The keeper stepped forward and raised the silver knife. "Stay behind me." The creature smiled. Its voice echoed from every corner of the church. "You still guard this prison?" The keeper said nothing. "You have grown old." "I cannot die." The creature laughed. "Neither can I." Thomas stared at them. "You know each other?" The keeper did not look away from the thing. "I have known it for 200 years. The creature smiled. "And before that?" A cold wind swept through the church. Then the creature looked at Thomas. "Edward's blood has returned." It took one step forward. The ground trembled. "I have waited a very long time for you. What are you?" Thomas whispered. The creature's face changed again. This time it became Edward Whittaker. Thomas nearly dropped the journal. "I am memory." The face changed. "I am fear." It changed again. "I am regret." Then it smiled. "And I am every secret humanity has tried to bury." The church became colder. The keeper's voice hardened. "Do not listen to it." The creature ignored him. Instead, it spoke directly to Thomas. "I can show you things." "What things?" "The truth." Suddenly the red light disappeared. Thomas found himself standing somewhere else. The church was gone. The keeper was gone. He stood in a field beneath a blood-red moon. A small farmhouse stood nearby, and outside it, a young man, Edward Whittaker. Thomas watched as his grandfather walked toward a hidden cellar. Then another figure appeared beside him, a younger version of the keeper. They were arguing. "You cannot open it," the keeper said. "There may be answers inside," Edward replied. "There is only suffering." "I have to know." The keeper looked desperate. "If you open that door, it will never stop calling to your family." But Edward ignored him. He opened the door. The world suddenly became dark. Then Thomas heard screaming. His grandfather's screaming. The vision vanished. Thomas found himself back inside the church. The creature stood before him. "You see now." Tears filled Thomas's eyes. "My grandfather caused this." "No." The creature smiled. "He made a mistake." The face changed again. "But mistakes can be corrected." The keeper stepped forward. "Do not believe it." The creature looked almost amused. "I am offering him a gift." "What gift?" The creature stared directly into Thomas's eyes. "I can bring your family back." Silence. "What?" "I can return everyone you have ever lost." The church suddenly changed again. Thomas saw his parents. He saw old friends. He saw faces he hadn't seen in years. They were smiling, waiting. "Open the gate completely," the creature whispered, "and none of them will ever leave you again." For a moment, Thomas almost believed it. Then he remembered the journal. "I saw people who had died many years ago. The thing behind the door knows our memories." His grandfather had seen the same visions, the same lies. Thomas took a step backward. The smiling faces immediately disappeared. The creature's expression darkened. "You refuse?" "I do." Silence. Then the church trembled. For the first time the creature looked angry. Then I will take what I need. The red light exploded again. Black shadows poured from the pit. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The servants. They climbed across the walls and ceiling. Their empty eyes stared at Thomas. The keeper raised the silver knife. There are too many. Gabriel backed toward the door. We're going to die. The keeper looked at Thomas. No. He reached into his coat and pulled out another key. This one was black. The prison can still be sealed. How? The keeper's face became solemn. The blood that opened it must close it. Thomas understood. My blood. The keeper nodded. Silence filled the ruined church. Then the creature smiled. You won't do it. The shadows crept closer. The red moon outside shone brighter. Thomas looked at the black key in the keeper's hand. Then he looked at the creature. At the servants. At the pit. Finally he took the key. The creature's smile vanished. No. The keeper stepped aside. What happens if I seal it? Thomas asked. The keeper answered quietly. You will be trapped here with me. Silence. Forever. The shadows stopped moving. Even the creature seemed surprised. Thomas looked at him. You mean, you've been here all this time? The keeper nodded. 200 years. Alone. Guarding the prison. Waiting. Thomas looked at the black key. Then at the old man. And for the first time, he understood the terrible truth. The keeper was not the jailer. He was another prisoner. The church shook violently. Cracks spread across the walls. The servants crawled closer. The creature in the pit watched silently. And Thomas stood there holding the black key. You are a prisoner? He asked. The keeper slowly nodded. For 200 years. Why? For the first time, sadness appeared on the old man's face. Then he said something unexpected. My real name is not the keeper. Silence. My name is Jonathan Hale. The name meant nothing to Thomas. But Gabriel gasped. No, the old man whispered. The keeper looked at him. You remember? Gabriel's hands began to tremble. My grandfather told me stories about you. Jonathan lowered his head. I thought everyone had forgotten. Who are you? Thomas asked. The old man looked into the red light. Then he began his story. I was born in 1779. Black Hollow did not exist then. There was only forest. One autumn night I found a cave beneath these hills. Inside the cave was a stone door. And behind the door, I heard voices. The church became silent. I was young and foolish. I believed the voices belonged to angels. I opened the door. He closed his eyes. It was the greatest mistake of my life. What happened? Thomas asked. Jonathan looked at him. Something came through. The creature smiled. Me. Jonathan ignored it. I tried to close the door, but I couldn't. Then how did you stop it? I made a bargain. Silence. The creature's smile widened. A terrible bargain. Jonathan nodded. I agreed to remain here and guard the prison for as long as I lived. But that's impossible, Thomas said. You should have died long ago. I did. Thomas froze. What? Jonathan's eyes seemed ancient. I died many years ago. The cold wind returned. But the prison would not let me leave. Silence. I have been neither living nor dead ever since. Another piece of the ceiling collapsed. The servants hissed. The creature took another step forward. You've kept your promise long enough, Jonathan. I made an oath. And I am tired of waiting. The ground trembled. Then the creature smiled at Thomas. Ask him the truth. Thomas looked at Jonathan. What truth? The creature's voice became soft. Ask him how your grandfather died. Jonathan suddenly looked away. Silence. Thomas's heart began to pound. How did Edward die? No answer. Jonathan. The old man closed his eyes. I killed him. Everything became still. Even the servants stopped moving. Thomas stared at him. What? He tried to open the gate again. No. I begged him to stop. The old man's voice trembled. He wouldn't listen. The church shook once more. Tears filled Jonathan's eyes. So I had to choose. Silence, the gate, or your grandfather. Thomas couldn't breathe. You killed him? Jonathan slowly nodded. The creature laughed. There it is. You murdered him. I saved this town. Thomas stepped backward. For 2 days he had trusted this man, believed him, and now he discovered that Jonathan had killed his grandfather. The creature moved closer. You see? He is no hero. Be silent, Jonathan shouted. No. Let him know the truth. The creature's face changed into Edward's once again. Your grandfather died alone. Jonathan looked broken. I never wanted it. But you did it. The creature smiled. And now you expect his grandson to sacrifice himself for you. Silence filled the church. Thomas looked at the black key, then at Jonathan, then at the pit. His mind was spinning. Could he trust this man? Could he trust anyone? Suddenly, a voice came from behind him. Thomas. He turned. A woman stood in the doorway. She wore a white dress. She looked familiar. Very familiar. Then his heart nearly stopped. It was his mother. She had died 10 years earlier. Mom, he whispered. She smiled. Come with me. Tears filled his eyes. I've missed you. I know. She held out her hand. You don't have to stay here. Jonathan immediately stepped forward. That's not your mother. The woman looked at him angrily. You've taken enough lives already. Thomas, don't listen to her. The creature smiled. The woman took another step. You've been alone for so long. Thomas's hands trembled. Mom? You can see all of us again. More figures appeared behind her. His father. His grandparents. Friends from his childhood. All smiling. Waiting. The creature whispered. Open the gate. The church became warm. Peaceful. For one brief moment, Thomas wanted to believe. Then he remembered something. His mother always wore a silver necklace. The woman before him wasn't wearing it. A tiny detail. But enough. He stepped backward. No. The smiling faces disappeared. The creature's expression turned cold. I said no. The red light exploded. The servants screamed. The creature roared in anger. Then you will remain alone forever. Thomas tightened his grip on the black key. And finally, he made his choice. He turned toward Jonathan. Tell me how to seal the gate. The creature's eyes widened. No. Jonathan looked stunned. You would do this? Thomas nodded slowly. My grandfather made a mistake. He looked into the pit. But I'm going to end it. The creature let out a terrible scream. The servants rushed forward. Jonathan grabbed Thomas's arm. Then we don't have much time. He pointed toward the pit. The lock is at the bottom. Thomas looked down into the endless darkness. The red light grew brighter. The creature smiled once more. Because deep below, something enormous had begun to move. And this time, it was waking completely. The ground split open completely. A staircase of black stone appeared inside the pit. The red light poured upward like fire. And from far below came a sound. A heartbeat. Slow. Deep. Powerful. Boom. 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 The entire church shook with each beat. Jonathan looked into the darkness. It has awakened. Thomas tightened his grip on the black key. Then let's finish this. The old keeper nodded. I'll hold the servants back. You must reach the lock. You mean, alone? There is no other way. Gabriel stepped forward. And what about me? Jonathan looked at him. Leave. What? Go while you still can. The old man hesitated. Then he slowly nodded. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night. Thomas and Jonathan were alone. The creature smiled. One last journey. Then the servants attacked. Black shadows rushed through the ruined church. Jonathan raised the silver knife. The blade burst into white light. For the first time the servants screamed in fear. "Go!" Jonathan shouted. Thomas ran. He leaped into the pit and landed on the stone stairs. The air below was freezing. The deeper he went, the louder the heartbeat became. Boom, boom, boom. The red light covered the walls. Strange symbols had been carved into the stone. Thousands of them. Names. Hundreds and hundreds of names. Some old, some recent. All scratched into the walls by hand. Then Thomas saw one that made him stop. Edward Whittaker. Below it, another name. Jonathan Hale. And beneath those names, an empty space. As if one final name was waiting to be written. A terrible thought entered his mind. The prison had always known. It had been waiting for him. He continued downward. After several minutes the staircase ended. A gigantic chamber stretched before him. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness. And at the center of the chamber stood a massive stone door. At least 50 feet tall. Covered in chains. Thousands of chains. Each chain carried the symbol of the red moon. And in the center of the door was a keyhole. The exact shape of the black key. Thomas slowly approached. Then the heartbeat stopped. Silence. A voice echoed through the chamber. At last. The creature had followed him. It stood beside the stone door. Its form no longer changed. Now it looked like a man made entirely of shadow. "I have waited centuries for this moment." Thomas raised the key. "I won't open it." The creature smiled. "You already have." Suddenly the symbols on the walls began to glow. The names. The chains. The floor. Everything. "What have you done?" Thomas whispered. The creature spread its arms. "Every step brought you closer." The stone door trembled. The prison does not open with blood alone. Silence. It opens with choice. Thomas felt cold. "You had to come here willingly." The creature smiled wider. "And you did." The first chain snapped. Then another. Then another. The sound echoed like thunder. "No." Thomas whispered. The door slowly began to open. A black mist poured through the crack. And then, something inside opened its eyes. Two enormous red eyes. Far larger than any human. Watching him. The heartbeat returned. Boom, boom, boom. Thomas stumbled backward. The creature laughed. "Meet the dreamer." "What is that?" The creature looked almost reverent. "The first fear." The chamber trembled. Before humanity feared darkness. Before humanity feared death. There was only this. The red eyes blinked. And suddenly Thomas saw things. Cities burning. Empires falling. Wars. Plagues. Millions of frightened faces. Every fear humanity had ever known. All flowing from the thing behind the door. Tears filled his eyes. "What is it?" The creature whispered. "It is the source." The door opened wider. A gigantic hand emerged. Its skin looked like black stone. Its fingers were longer than tree trunks. The chamber shook. The creature knelt before it. "My master." The red eyes focused on Thomas. And for the first time, the ancient being spoke. Its voice sounded like mountains breaking apart. "You carry the key." Thomas couldn't move. "Finish the opening." The black key in his hand became hot. Almost burning. The door wanted him. The creature wanted him. Everything had been leading to this. Another voice echoed through the chamber. "Thomas." "Jonathan." He appeared at the top of the stairs, wounded and covered in blood. The servants followed behind him. "There is still time." The creature turned. "No." Jonathan raised the silver knife. "Throw the key." Thomas stared at him. "If you throw it into the door, the prison will seal forever." The creature screamed. "Don't listen to him." The gigantic hand pushed farther through the opening. The chamber shook violently. Stones fell from the ceiling. Jonathan looked at Thomas one final time. "Choose." Thomas looked at the key. At the door. At the ancient eyes watching him. He made his decision. He raised his arm and threw the black key directly into the opening. The creature screamed in pure rage. The key disappeared into darkness. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then every chain on the door began to glow. The red eyes widened. The ancient being let out a roar so terrible that the entire mountain shook. The stone door began to close. Slowly, painfully. The creature ran toward it. No. After all this time, Jonathan grabbed Thomas. Run. But the creature suddenly turned toward them. Its face filled with hatred. And it spoke one final sentence. The prison always keeps one guardian. Then the chamber exploded with red light. The red light consumed everything. Thomas couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The roar of the ancient being echoed through the mountain. The silence. Absolute silence. Thomas slowly opened his eyes. He was lying on the cold stone floor. The chamber was gone. The giant door was gone. The red light had vanished. Only darkness remained. Then he heard footsteps. He sat up. Jonathan Hale stood a few feet away. But something was different. The old man looked younger, stronger, and strangely peaceful. "It's over," Jonathan said softly. Thomas looked around. "Where are we?" "The prison is sealed." "And the creature?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Sleeping once again." Relief flooded Thomas's body. Then he remembered the creature's final words. "The prison always keeps one guardian." He looked at Jonathan. "Who is the new keeper?" The old man didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the darkness. Thomas followed his gaze. A stone pedestal stood nearby, and on it lay a silver key. The same key Jonathan had carried for 200 years. Slowly, Thomas understood. No. Jonathan's eyes filled with sadness. The prison needs a guardian. No. It always has. No. The old man stepped forward. "My time is over, Thomas. You can't leave me here." Jonathan smiled. "I never intended to." Silence. "Then what are you saying?" The old keeper looked directly into his eyes. "You won't stay." Thomas froze. "What?" Jonathan walked toward the pedestal. "When you threw the black key, you changed the rules." "I don't understand." The old man picked up the silver key. "For centuries, the prison demanded a prisoner." He looked at the key in his hand. "But you chose sacrifice instead of fear." The darkness around them began to tremble. "And because of that, it finally released me." Thomas's eyes widened. "You mean?" Jonathan nodded. "There will be no more keepers." Silence. "The prison will remain closed forever." Tears filled Thomas's eyes. "Then, you're free?" "For the first time in 200 years. Jonathan smiled. "Yes." The darkness around them began to disappear. The chamber faded like mist. The old keeper looked toward the sky that was slowly appearing above them. "I had forgotten what the stars looked like." Thomas couldn't speak. Jonathan turned to him one last time. "Your grandfather was a good man." Thomas looked up. "He made a mistake. Like all of us." The old keeper smiled. "But he spent his final days trying to save this town." Silence. "He wrote those letters, didn't he?" Jonathan nodded. "He knew one day you might return." "The letters came from him?" "Yes." "How?" The old man laughed softly. "Some mysteries should remain mysteries." For the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, Thomas smiled. The sky above them grew brighter. Morning was coming. Jonathan looked toward the light. "I think someone is waiting for me." "Who?" The old keeper's eyes became distant. "My wife." Silence. "And my daughter." Tears filled his eyes. "I haven't seen them in 200 years." The light grew stronger. Jonathan stepped toward it. Then he stopped. "There is one last thing." He reached into his coat and handed Thomas the old journal. "Keep this." Thomas took it carefully. "So people remember." The old keeper nodded. "So they remember." The light surrounded him completely. His body began to fade. Thomas stepped forward. "Jonathan." The old man looked back. "Thank you." Jonathan smiled. "No, Thomas." He looked toward the sunrise. "Thank you." He disappeared. Like mist in the morning sun. Gone. At last. Free. When Thomas opened his eyes again, he was standing outside the ruins of the red church. Birds were singing. The sun had risen. The church itself was different. The cracks were gone. The strange symbols had vanished. And the entrance to the prison had completely disappeared. As if it had never existed. Thomas stood there for a long time. Then he looked down. In his hand was the journal. And beside it, a small silver necklace. A necklace he had seen once before. In an old photograph. Jonathan's family. He smiled. The keeper had finally gone home. 3 days later, Thomas left Black Hollow. Before leaving, he visited the cemetery one last time. Edward Whitaker's grave looked peaceful. For the first time, the disturbed soil had settled. Thomas placed the journal beside the gravestone. Then he whispered, "You can rest now." A gentle wind passed through the cemetery. And for a brief moment, he thought he heard a familiar voice. "Thank you." Years later, the people of Black Hollow would tell a strange story. They would speak of a ruined red church deep in the forest. Of letters that arrived from the dead. Of a man who guarded a terrible secret for 200 years. Most people believed it was only a legend. But sometimes, on cold autumn nights, the people of Black Hollow claimed they saw an old man in a black coat walking through the woods. Not as a prisoner. Not as a guardian. But simply as a man finally going home.